Like a lot of gamers are pogging about the Microsoft deal. Why? I think a lot of people are just I think they think this will mean better games, especially because like here, I mean, if I'm going to speculate on it, they consider Activision Blizzard to be mismanaged and they think Microsoft can save it. I think that's literally it. Not recognizing that that'll probably, like, these kinds of mergers never lead to better games. But the only reason why I think they think that is because Activision Blizzard is like notoriously horrifically mismanaged. And the Xbox subscription will now have like, or the Microsoft Game Pass will have significantly more exclusive games. But I think that's it. That's the reason. They have Game Pass and want Call of Duty on Game Pass. However, I'm sure Game Pass is going to get much more expensive. Literally, the only time a huge game merger has ever produced better games is Square and Enix. Yeah, people have like a anyone but Bobby Kotick attitude on the matter, and I think that's where it's coming from. That's, you guys are asking me why people are celebrating it. This is the reason. Which is ironic because a big part of the reason why Blizzard is no longer the Blizzard that you know is because of prior acquisitions and, you know, financial incentives turning a company that used to make art into a company that is just trying to make as much money as possible. But gamers don't think about it like that. They just see see it as like anyone but Bobby Kotick leading the helm will make Blizzard better. And it could. We'll see. U.S. District Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley said in a ruling that the merger deserves scrutiny, noting it could be the largest in the history of the tech industry. But federal regulators were unable to show how it would cause serious harm and wouldn't likely prevail if they took it to a full trial, she wrote. The Federal Trade Commission, which enforces antitrust laws in a laughable capacity, has not raised serious questions regarding whether the proposed merger is likely to substantially lessen competition between video game consoles or in the growing markets for monthly game subscriptions or cloud-based gaming, Corley said. A ruling favorable to Microsoft was not a surprise after the company's lawyers had the upper hand in a 5-day San Francisco court hearing that ended late last month. The proceeding showcased testimony by Microsoft Chief Executive Officer Satya Nadella and longtime Blizzard Activision CEO Bobby Kotick, who both pledged to keep Activision's blockbuster game Call of Duty available to people who play it on consoles, particularly Sony's PlayStation, that compete with Microsoft's Xbox. They also previously lied, I believe, about Bethesda releases not being exclusive, so don't know how well that will work out for all of the gamers that are celebrating this decision. It's very odd that like Microsoft basically was like, we lost the console wars to Sony and Nintendo. Okay, we lost. We lost the big ticket consoles to Sony, and we were never beating Nintendo anyway because Nintendo has the market on handheld and they dominate. So I think who knows? I mean, I personally don't care because I also have a PC, so I get to play all the Microsoft releases regardless. So it's no skin off my bones, but an older Hasan, or rather a younger Hasan, would have been very frustrated by this decision because I had an unrealistic brand loyalty to Sony that was deeply ingrained inside of my mind, my body, my soul for no fucking reason whatsoever. Other than, I believe, Metal Gear Solid, and even I'm old enough to remember Rockstar releases being exclusive to Sony. Right. I'm so old. I am so fucking old that Grand Theft Auto 3 was an exclusive release to Sony. And for that reason, I actually never even played. For that reason, I never even played Gears of War or Halo. NVIDIA or AMD? No, I'm definitely an NVIDIA fan for sure, especially for what I do. The one thing that can unite the world is all games playable on all consoles and a new Kingdom Hearts with every video game character in it. Yeah, I love IP mergers. I love video games that just like vomit out IP. Watchdog demands recusal of judge overseeing the Activision case because her son works for Microsoft. What the fuck? So what I find to be particularly funny about this incident is that there is a little bit of truth on both sides, I think. Because this merger in and of itself, for the record, I don't know if it fits the monopoly rules, like the antitrust rules, because companies have, I mean, this is typical. I guess it depends on what you consider a monopoly. Like from the purest sense, it is, right? It's still well, I guess this would be vertical integration. It's still vertical integration, right? It's vertical expansion. You're technically, as a console provider, as a hardware provider, buying yet another software provider for your hardware. But in the United States of America, there are no antitrust rules. Let's be real. But even if there was less strict antitrust rules, I don't know if this would violate them. Like the European standard. I don't know if this would violate the European standard. Wouldn't this decision effectively monopolize most of the gaming market and start to effectively price out regular consumers? Also, wouldn't this just further corporations that use video games as a strictly investment vehicle or stakeholder gain only? Wouldn't this effectively start to price out regular consumers slowly? Yes. But that's been happening nonstop. It's been, EU approved it, only the UK rejected it. So that's why, like, I at least still look to, like, European regulations on monopolies, which are not great either, because the EU is basically following the footsteps of the United States of America, but like 10 years delayed. This kind of corporate consolidation is the norm already. This kind of corporate consolidation is already the norm. And ironically, this kind of corporate consolidation has been happening between publishers, right? So it's not like all of these other publishers and developers have been merging already, and now they're merging, and now they're merging with like platform creators or hardware makers as well. The reason gamers are celebrating is because they have short-ass memories and only see short-term benefits until they realize they got fucked later on. Yeah, that kind of stuff is insidious, and it happens later. Microsoft exec was ready to go spend Sony out of business to strengthen Xbox. Internal email shows Microsoft's early thinking on acquisition to drive Xbox Game Pass growth. Yeah. It's interesting because as someone who worked at Blizzard previously, I enjoy this guy's insight on the different dynamics and how it will affect the employees. I make 4 major points. Good for Blizzard employees, good for Blizzard fans, bad for the video game industry. Blizzard has not thrived under Activision in recent years. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, it's not Blizzard, it's Activision Blizzard, which means that like a merger happened there already, which made the fucking company worse overall. Okay? So like, there is already that. So that merger already made it substantially worse for everybody. So I do think that this is like people getting excited for the short-term benefits. Also, people do like what's his face? People do legitimately like Phil Spencer, it seems. Like gamers like Phil Spencer. They do. They think he's like Phil Spencer is like the exact opposite of Bobby Kotick in the eyes of gamers. For those of you who don't know, Phil Spencer is the CEO of Microsoft Gaming. Bobby Kotick is the CEO of Activision Blizzard. Everybody fucking despises Bobby Kotick for very good reasons. Phil Spencer is a very good mascot for Microsoft Gaming. He has had some really interesting takes both on Activision Blizzard, but also simultaneously, he has said things like Microsoft has actually ceded ground to Sony in the console wars. Like, we've lost it. We can't do anything about it. Meanwhile, internally, Microsoft seemingly is singing a different tune. Some Microsoft executives are trying to spend Sony out of business. Now, of course, that's a laughable concept. I don't know if you could spend Sony out of business. That would be a ridiculous amount of lift and a ridiculous amount of money, but it still shows what their interests are. Like it still shows where their interests lie. Obviously, IP leads that battle, and Sony still maintains a lot of great IP. You know, that's the interesting part of this equation. Anyway, Blizzard does not thrive under Activision. In recent years, Activision has forced increasing cost-cutting measures and revenue demands upon Blizzard, which has driven many talented senior personnel out of the company. Activision's business model is to maximize profits, seemingly at all costs. Of course, that's everyone's business model. This means an RTS title like StarCraft 2 or Warcraft 4 will never be greenlit under current leadership. There's not enough money in the RTS genre. Microsoft, however, has a different business model. Microsoft is all about market dominance. They don't mind making less profit on a smaller title as long as you are either playing a Microsoft game or playing it on a Microsoft device / platform. Their ideal is a customer existing within an entire Microsoft ecosystem. This is true. But that is also for profit. It's just longer-term profit. But longer-term profit by market share dominance is what Amazon does. It is the strategy of every big blue-chip American corporation. They flood the marketplace with dollars. They buy out all the competition. They forcibly drive them out if they can. And then they turn around and create their own internal ecosystem. And as everybody knows, what ends up happening when you finally reach monopoly market share is you, one, fire all of your labor force regularly. Okay, there's a tremendous amount of just moving your workforce around despite maintaining record high profits. And also, you slowly start to increase the prices back. You cut the quality and you increase the prices, or you engage in other revenue strategies such as microtransactions, DLCs, things that gamers recognize as like a bad thing overall, things that even the most rugged capitalist gamer looks at and goes, oh, that's really shitty. I hate that. It's basically a race to the bottom. It is also part of the reason why the video game space and all of the major developers and publishers that used to make, incredible AAA titles every 6 years that focused on a compelling single-player story, that created a universe for you, have turned into shark card selling, money-making monsters that almost hyper-focus on selling you cosmetic skins, DLCs, and also sending you video games that are not complete on release. Video games that are not working perfectly fine. The moment where capitalist gamers start saying this is not capitalism, it's corporatism. Yeah, it's just copiumism. That's what it is. Have you played Metal Gear Solid 5 yet? Of course I did. What do you mean? I am a diehard Kojima fanboy, my friend. I played it on release. Microsoft is all about market dominance. We already covered that. So this is good for Blizzard and its employees because Microsoft will greenlight smaller passion projects that are not projected to be monetization machines. We'll likely see fewer layoffs and support positions that are not directly driving revenue. Less pressure on the devs to make money. This is good for Blizzard fans because happier devs that can focus on making good games rather than making money means better games for us. Also, StarCraft 2 is a real possibility under Microsoft because Microsoft is already invested in RTS titles. Microsoft also doesn't exclusively maintain Xbox profits. Microsoft Gaming also features desktop games, which means RTS might make a return. StarCraft 3, he means, not StarCraft 2. But listen, this isn't copium. I don't think this guy is wrong when he says this because Microsoft Gaming is not just Xbox. Microsoft Gaming is also PC gaming. And let's be real, RTS is almost entirely a PC gaming project. I don't know if there has been a successful way. To create RTS games that are playable, just as playable as they are on the desktop on consoles yet. Okay? Even Diablo, which is not an RTS game, but it's still isometric, is relatively difficult to play on a console. And I say this as someone who played it on the Steam Deck while also simultaneously playing it on the PC. So this is part of the reason why I can see a bigger return to RTS games. But again, I am not so. I'll just say it like this: I am not as open-minded as he is about this, because ultimately this relies on Phil Spencer's good nature, and he is a CEO after all, so I will never trust him. Ultimately, this relies on them having like enough long-term profit interests. Okay? And I don't know if they have enough long-term profit interest, because that's not how American corporations operate. American corporations never have, even when they're talking about monopolization, they still are not factoring in long-term revenue strategies, long-term market share strategies. Why? Because they are still absolutely 100% under a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders. What that means is every single quarter they have to justify what they're doing, and for that reason, they always have to massage the numbers. They always have to be like, oh, well, we fired a bunch of people. Don't worry. We're lean. We're a lean operation. We're more efficient. Please. The number keeps growing. The numbers keep going up. So prices. It's easier for three big companies to collude to raise prices $100 a game when they represent 75% of all games being released and 100% of AAA titles. Creative control. If big company doesn't want to make a game about X, all studios that they own will make no such game. Cannibalization. Big companies less likely to greenlight an ARPG from Studio X if they feel like they will compete with the ARPG they have from Studio Y. Less diversity. We end up with each megacorp having its own big FPS, its own big MMO, which hurts choice for consumers. Indie becomes the only recourse, but it becomes harder for indie devs to get a budget or get picked up by the megacorps. Why fund new small ARPG studio when you own a veteran big ARPG studio already? This part is also true. Ultimately, though, the last three things that he just mentioned is the reason why I'm always anti-mergers. I'm always anti-monopolization. Imagine if Valve was publicly traded and not mostly owned by Gaben. Gamers take that for granted, to be honest. Okay, but you have to also understand something here. Valve runs on gambling. Valve used to be a game developer. Now they're getting into the hardware space, and I love the hardware that they're making. People love the Index. They say it's one of the best VR consoles out there. I am literally a personal diehard fucking fan of the Steam Deck. I play it. I use it more. It is my daily driver. It is the console that I use more than the PC itself when I'm playing video games, right? But ultimately, Valve is run by gambling, and Valve is also run by being a marketplace for games. A cooperatively owned corporation that used to have one of the most notorious socialist economists out there, Yanis Varoufakis, turned into a basic monopoly that sells video games, and that's how they make their money. Valve does gambling. Didn't know that. Wait, what do you mean? What do you think the CSGO crates are? I mean, I don't know how much fucking CSGO crates are helping feed Valve, but that's certainly one aspect. You saying Steam Deck is the kick of PC gaming? No, Steam Deck has nothing to do with. Steam Deck has nothing to do with gambling. CSGO skins are $1 billion business in and of itself. Video on how Valve operates. Okay. Oh, these guys are great.
So we've been working on this since August. There's been, I think, 16 interviews in total. Let's see how this goes. So you know Valve, right? The company responsible for Half-Life, Portal, Left 4 Dead, Team Fortress, Counter-Strike, and more recently, all sorts of ambitious hardware projects as well. But arguably, its most significant role is that it's the custodian and the landlord of the largest PC games marketplace in the world. And because of that fact alone, how it makes decisions and who gets to make them is worth talking about. So with that in mind, let me ask you something. how does Valve make decisions? And who does get to make them? Those aren't necessarily the easiest questions to answer. What you may have heard is that Valve has no managers, no job titles even. And in fact, if you work there, you alone get to decide what you'd like to work on. But to put it another way, there are no bosses because everybody's the boss. That's the pitch at least. Quick side note here, there is still a board of directors at Valve and 2 of them are rumored to own actual super yachts crewed by
Gaben.
about 20 people each. So let's not confuse this with a worker cooperative just yet, okay?
Look at this motherfucker on his Steam Deck. God, it's such a good dude. It's hard to hate on Gaben because Valve does make really good product. We're such cucks, dude. Gamers are such fucking cucks. You give a gamer like something that is marginally better than what they're used to, and they'll just be like, no, you're my lord, you're my king, you're my savior, you are literally the best.
Okay, but here's another thing you might know about the company. It's opaque. A Valve interview is a rare, treasured thing, and when they do happen, they tend to be about a very specific product or some grand thing about the future of games and technology. And as a result, it's not a company that's typically being challenged on how it treats its staff or whether that 30% cut it's taking from most games being sold through Steam is actually a fair deal. If you've watched our most recent investigation into the third-party gambling sites that are plugged firmly into Counter-Strike Global Offensive, you'll know we were extremely keen to understand why these operations had been allowed.
Also, there's a good chance with this merger the AA game dev space is dead because there's a limited reasoning to invest in titles that cost less than a AAA blockbuster but are much larger than your average indie game. This truly sucks. That part is also true, yes, I think. I mean, I don't know. I don't think any kind of merger is good.
Allowed to prosper by Valve over
Steam Deck or PS5? I have a PlayStation 5. I've played a total of like 8 hours on it. I have a Steam Deck. I've played hundreds of hours on it. So there's your answer.
the years, despite all the controversy. Whose job was it to be on top of this stuff?
Give me an example of a AA game. I can't off the top of my head, but this distinction between AAA and AA is a relatively new one as well. And there is also confusion on like what would be considered a AA game versus what would be considered a AAA game. Hades, for example, people are saying is a AA game, but not necessarily because Hades itself is indie. Yakuza, I think, would be a better example of a AA game. Disco Elysium, again, indie. So no, I don't think that those games would be considered. It's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary distinction. But I don't think those games would be considered a AA game versus a AAA game or anything like that. I think those games are independent. God of War Horizon? You think God of War is a AA game? Are you insane? There is no better version of a AAA game. Maybe there's another distinction out there. People are claiming that now you can do a quadruple A game. God of War would fit the quadruple A standard if there was, if that standard was to be applied. A 300 million budget game is considered AA. Yeah, like God of War is bigger than like most movies, dude. Like this stuff is still kind of new. These kinds of designations are kind of new. So there is a lot of back and forth. I mean, I was even, what was it? Chapo had an interview with a game developer who was literally talking about the classifications of what would be a AA game, especially when they're under a corporate structure, what would be classified as a AAA game, and potentially what would be considered a quadruple A game if there is such a new term that needs to be invented. So I normally agree with you, but you're wrong on this one. How can a tunnel-based game like God of War be considered AAA? Why does it take so much money to develop? Are the developers stupid? Yeah, this is a person who does not understand the insane amount of lift it takes to make a video game. Or it's got to be bait, right? I assume it's bait. It's bait. All right, never mind. Holy fuck. Most Capcom and Sega games tend to be AA, I think. Yakuza, Devil May Cry, some Resident Evil entries, but like Resident Evil 4, I would say is AAA. But I could see Yakuza games being considered AA. Star Citizen is definitely a quadruple A game. Okay, Star Citizen is not a game. Oh wait, am I mistaken that was Starfield? Yeah. Oh no, Star Citizen is the meme. Yeah, Star Citizen is not a game. It's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. NMP Lol is a Star Citizen streamer. Yeah, NMP Lol is the one funding Star Citizen, and a firm believer in its success. It will happen one day. Yeah, people talk about how gambling is evil and immoral to do on stream, and then nobody talks about NMP Lol's gambling on Star Citizen's future. Original Half-Life is a quadruple A game. Look at everything that came from it, and praise Gaben.
And what kind of decisions had they been making? We didn't know. And in fact, as we worked on that video, we realized we didn't know much at all about how Valve operated. Not really. And so we spent the last 6 months doing that work, interviewing 16 former and current Valve employees about whether or not this structureless utopia with no bosses and no bureaucracy truly exists. You're gonna have to forgive me for spoiling the answer up front here, but in short, for some people, it does, sort of. I've spoken to employees who have loved working there, who truly believe in the vision and who describe Valve as a melting pot of some of the brightest minds in the games industry. But I've also spoken to others who've argued that although Valve may have a flat structure in theory, in reality, the power at Valve is anything but flat, leading to a workplace culture that two former employees compared to the Lord of the Flies.
Back off, man! I'm sick of your shit and so's my game!
Hiring, firing, and salary negotiations are all handled in an unconventional way, which I'm told has led to certain personality types and demographics benefiting much more than others. Now, you might argue that many businesses have fallen foul of that particular issue, but the thing you need to know about Valve is that even by games industry standards, it has a gigantic diversity problem. This is a company that has been unwilling or unable to hire people that properly reflect the world around it, despite the best efforts of some who've worked there over the years and who have pushed for change. And so, we're going to talk about the ways in which Valve's structure and its leadership have ultimately blocked that change.
The hot versus not hot pay gap. Yeah, Gaben paid the highest because he's the hottest. It's really fucked up. No one is talking about how hot Gaben is and why that factors into how much he gets paid out.
These problems became even more apparent following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, leading to a lot of internal discussion at Valve about race and culminating in a generous payout being made to each employee, allowing them to donate it as they saw fit. However, as you may have also noticed at the time, no public statement was made by Valve about Black Lives Matter, and it continues to be an employer of largely one demographic. We'll hear more about all of that.
Okay, I don't care about this stuff. All right.
In the second half of this video. But first, Valve is frankly unlike any other games company in the world.
Like, I do care about this concept, but I don't care about it right now as it pertains to my interests. My interests rely on the internal structure of Valve and how it factors into their lack of gaming. Does that make sense? Like, obviously, this is something I care about normally, diversity in companies and whatnot, but ultimately in this structure, in this story, I care more about, for my particular interest in narrative building, I care more about like what changed internally at Valve that led them to make the decisions they have, which is basically what I was talking about, which is that like there's no Half-Life 3, you know what I mean?
Let's talk about why. This is Valve's official employee handbook, first leaked in 2012 and then officially published for anybody to read. It is, at least partially, meant as a recruitment tool, describing Valve as the best place to work on Earth and detailing its structure, approach to pay, and of course, how every desk at Valve has wheels, allowing you to roll yourself and all your stuff to wherever you'd feel you'd be most valuable. I think all of this is a really useful demonstration of how, at least in 2012, Valve wanted to be perceived as a company. It's not just a job you'll have if you work there, it's a fearless adventure in knowing what to do when no one's there telling you what to do. Again, this is meant to encourage more people to work at Valve, so it wasn't exactly going to open with, don't work here, the aircon's always broken on the 14th floor, but there's something almost fanatic about the way in which it's written. So here's what I want to do. I want to go through this handbook some 10 years after it was published and tell you what it got right and what it got wrong according to the people we've spoken to. To do this, People Make Games has interviewed former and current employees of Valve under the condition of anonymity, allowing them to speak freely about their experiences without risking their careers, either within Valve or elsewhere. And so when you do hear quotes being read from those interviews, you'll instead be listening to voice actors that we've hired. Let's start right here. Welcome to Flatland. Now, to quote Valve directly, when you're an entertainment company that spent the last decade going out of its way to recruit the most intelligent, innovative, talented people on Earth, telling them to sit at a desk and do what they're told obliterates 99% of their value. 99%, that sounds like quite a lot. Take that, most video games companies. Most company org charts look something like this, right? You've got a bunch of employees down at the bottom here, all in different departments, doing different things, and they've got their own managers who've...
Many former Valve employees have talked about how at the end of the day, the compensation is directly tied to how profitable the work you do is, which makes things like upkeeping existing games a losing proposition for employees. I mean, that doesn't make sense considering that Valve has tremendous amount of upkeep on games like CSGO because they are profitable. Like, what do you mean? I guess Team Fortress 2.
They've got their own managers and so on and so forth until you get right to the very top where a CEO
they make a game a decade. The fuck is this guy talking about? Yeah.
When anyone higher up makes a decision, that's then meant to trickle down through the ranks and be acted upon by the employees below. Now, Valve claims to be doing something totally different. Here, people don't have job titles and nobody's a manager, so instead of your typical hierarchy, it promises a flattened company structure in which employees are meant to be making their own decisions based on what they believe will benefit the company as a whole. Want to fix that problem that's aggravating you about Steam, or maybe throw around some ideas for a new Portal game, or perhaps you're interested in Steam VR? Well, the pitch here is that you can do any of those things. Just wheel your desk over to the relevant team, and if there isn't one, make your own.
When I worked there, there was this thing we would tell people when they'd come and talk to the company. We think we're the largest structuralist company in the world. At least within the games industry, I think that's definitely true.
We interviewed people all the time, and one of the goals was to understand if they could succeed in that type of environment. Not everyone can.
There's just as much structure as you might find in any other company of its size. The key difference is that the structure isn't written down in a way that
They should wield their desk to the Half-Life 3 desk. Yeah. What are they? That's the problem. Some of the wheels have been busted for a while. They just simply haven't been able to wheel over to the Half-Life 3 desk. That's the issue.
becomes immovable. People take on different roles that you would see at a traditional company, but those roles are temporary. It's not like you define your value over the entire course of your career there as just a project manager or whatever it is. You're not just one thing.
Valve can be this extremely attractive place to work as a result, with this inherent sense of freedom, great pay, an on-site gym filled with personal trainers, company vacations to Hawaii, and the opportunity to work on some of games' most beloved titles. But you need to be the right fit. That's something that came up time and time again in the interviews that we've had. And if you've watched our video on classism in the games industry, you know that that term just begs to be unpicked and scrutinized. Here's how the handbook puts it. If we start adding people to the company who aren't as capable as we are at operating as high-powered, self-directed, senior decision makers, then lots of the stuff discussed in this book will stop working. Whereas one former employee told me he believed there was even a maximum number of potential Valve employees spread across the globe right now, and that number is perhaps somewhere around 10,000 people.
Maybe that number is off by a factor of 2 or 4, but it's not off by a factor of 10 or 100.
I don't know that I've ever heard somebody in video games make that kind of claim before.
Okay, first of all, I don't even have an issue with this. You can throw up question marks all you want, but this is like, I don't know how much of this is just like straight marketing material to like hire people, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think that is basically, no, it's not elitism either. I think it just shows, I think the original intention of Valve, remember, was supposed to be a cooperative corporation. And from that sense, it's not supposed to be purely profit driven, but more so driven for survival. Now, of course, that hasn't happened. We know what Valve is now, but I think that stays from that has just like switched over from the former cooperative corporation structure. Because what that implies, if you're not like, I just see myself and how I operate. in the way that is written and designed, like I don't have the consistent need for growth. You know what I mean? I'm not always like, oh man, I got to find new revenue strategies, like new ways to make money, hire some people and like expand and expand and expand. Like, and I get that. I if you just, sometimes it should be okay to just have a structure that isn't designed around purely generating more profits. However, I think that's just an old holdover from the prior corporate culture that they had. That is definitely not what Valve is today. Does that make sense? Because the Steam store has completely reshaped how Valve operates.
Only 0.0000125% of the world's entire population would have what it takes to work alongside them. It says something, I think, about Valve's company culture. It's the kind of thing you might expect a Silicon Valley employee to say, maybe, or, I don't know, a Navy SEAL.
You still have to come with the mental preparation that...
There are millions of people who can make a game as bad as Artifact.
allows you to get through difficult circumstances.
But for the time being, back to how this works in practice. Let's say you work at Valve and you want to, I don't know, make a game about a quiet lad who runs around smacking disgusting crabs with his crowbar. Maybe you need an artist and a programmer to help get you started. And if that's the case, you'll usually need to go out into the rest of Valve and recruit the right people onto the project yourself. If you're able to convince those people to work on this thing with you instead of whatever it was that they were working on before, then great. Wheel all your desks together and get started. To begin with, everybody...
This part is really fucking weird, dude. I do find this very odd. The whole like desk thing. It's like a very anarchist structure. Dude, so what? Like, if you're not charismatic, how does that work? Especially when, like, what are these stem cells supposed to do? You know what I mean? If you're like a fucking STEM lord and you're not necessarily like a charismatic person, how the fuck are you gonna wheel and deal, you know? If you ain't got Riz, you're fucked. Yeah. Sounds like a classic tyranny of the structureless. You get this reverse feedback loop where the ad hoc structures that emerge work great for the people they work great for, so it becomes hard for them to want to change them for the people that they don't work well for.
He's necessarily leading the project, but let's say at some point you scale up and instead of 3 people working on this, there's 20. Who keeps everyone moving in the same direction? Because wait a minute, didn't we just say Valve doesn't do managers? The thing is, bigger projects like this do still need some sort of organization to function. They need what Valve describes as team leads. It's just these roles are meant to be more fluid than at other companies.
It isn't true to say there's no management at Valve. It's just there's no institutionalized management. There are some people at Valve, I'd say a small number of people, who are great natural managers. There are also people at Valve that have that de facto role but aren't necessarily great at it. And that's true at any company. It's just that at Valve, it's sort of a secret who's who. And so when people are bad managers, it can take a very long time for that to be addressed. Sometimes the way that...
Anarchists immediately going, so what? Why are prescribed structures holier than ad hoc structures? I didn't say that, but I think that there's still, leadership is still a necessity, in my opinion, to make stuff happen. For example, I'll give you a Slavoj Žižek example, even though he obviously is wrong on a lot of shit and a boomer and writes too much and is weird, but it's kind of like there is a tyranny that comes from making democratic decisions on every single minutia in your life. Like, for example, I don't want to fucking democratically vote on what kind of chemicals are utilized in the water supply. Like, I want to relegate that to the scientists that know best. Okay? Like, you would not be able to operate. No, I'm not talking about PFAS, okay? Obviously, that there is a point where that breaks. And in the United States of America, that point is long gone. But what I'm trying to fucking say here is that there are certain aspects of living in a social cohesive formation like a society that greatly benefit everyone and helps division of labor occur. And if every single aspect was hyper democratized, if every single aspect was, a direct democracy, you would just not be able to operate.
That's addressed is the project goes down in flames, and that person.
How is that a good response? Your example was completely detached from the situation at hand. Well, I gave you an example of how direct democracy in every aspect of your existence fails to show you how direct democracy in this circumstance, direct democracy in every aspect of commodity production, can also lead to failure in a similar structure. What do you mean? This does not mean that, like, I don't believe in democracy in the workplace. Of course I do. But specialization must occur. And I'm more so a believer in voting in for managers and team leaders and ensuring that experts are still relied upon. Does that make sense? Because there's still socialist, by the way. Yeah, the only socialism in commodity production unironically comes from whatever your fucking personal understanding is. Flat fees overall. Everyone gets to do whatever the fuck they want to, and then nothing gets done. There's no need for like workers' councils or anything like that because every man has his own boss, actually. Game dev here, you absolutely need leadership on large-scale projects. Work often has to be delegated across specializations and time zones. To be honest, if you're always in fucking meetings, you're never making a game. We talk about this as civil engineering. It's the idea that engineers would have to explain things they've studied for 10 plus years to people with no knowledge of the subject and convince them why they should spend money on it. Yeah.
Doesn't become a de facto manager again.
Other employees I spoke to suggested that in most cases you do actually know who's leading the bigger projects because it's typically someone who's been at Valve for a long time. And so, although it might not be written down anywhere, there is in fact a clear hierarchy in place. But let's think about some of the other things that managers are ordinarily responsible for. Hiring, firing.
A big part of why people hate managers is because they aren't experts. Voting in managers would be net same as them naturally arising in this situation. Yeah. And there is also still the downside of that where it's like, well, whichever the most charismatic team leader is will end up getting that position and not necessarily the person who's like the best equipped for the job. And I kind of see that. But ultimately, yes, forcing excessive voting is obstructionist. And I do agree with that. The issue is, I think there is no middle ground here where people literally look to their current corporate structure and think, oh, what you're doing is you want like a tyranny of the minority, just like the way that our unjustifiable hierarchy operates in our current work structure. And that's not what I'm saying at all. There needs to be an element of democratization there, for sure, with how profits get how profits get shared, with more autonomy in your workplace, in your work hours, because you know your work structure better than anyone else does. Currently, that is entirely controlled by people who never fucking touch your job at all and don't give a shit and see you as completely replaceable nodes, right? But that's not what I'm advocating for, obviously, when I say this. What I'm basically saying is that you can have an element of democratization without having every aspect of it be relegated back to individuals that are working on the project.
Performance reviews and salary negotiations. You know what? I'm going to jump straight to that last one because I think it's really important to understand about Valve. Let's talk about stat ranking. If you've heard of this concept before, it might be in relation to Microsoft, who used its own version of stat ranking to measure the performance of its employees from sometime around the early 2000s to 2013, by which point it had become an intensely controversial practice within the company. Valve's co-founders, Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington, were both ex-Microsoft, it's worth pointing out. But it's not a one-for-one comparison. Valve's stat ranking is very much its own thing. Here's how it works. Typically, a starting salary at Valve has been described to me as being extremely competitive for a video games gig, but also when compared to the likes of Amazon and Microsoft, who both have headquarters close to Valve's own in Bellevue, Washington. And this salary that you start with is then adjusted annually via what's known as the stack ranking process, although COVID has gotten in the way of this in more recent years. In a typical year, however, from about October onwards, employees are invited into meetings with a handful of other co-workers in which they're asked to evaluate the performance of several of their other colleagues based on 4 separate metrics: skill level, productivity, group contribution, and product contribution. You can read Valve's own definitions for each of these in the employee handbook.
Mostly everybody participates in the ranking, if they want to participate. We generally have groups of 4 to 6 people in each meeting, and usually they're ranking 10 employees at a time. Those 10 employees being ranked are generally all people that those in the meeting have worked with through the year.
Once enough of these meetings have taken place, everybody at Valve should have been ranked by at least 2 separate groups, meaning that you end up with this giant list of every single employee at the company ranked in order by how highly their peers have rated them. Valve then uses that list to sort all of the employees into different bandings. So here's everyone that's overperforming, here's everyone that met expectations, and here are the folks that are currently underperforming.
They were somewhat stressful meetings in terms of, ranking people. It's stressful, but I can't think of a single time where I felt like people were being dishonest or had some kind of agenda or
Corporate MMR? Oh, Jesus. That's kind of wild.
something. We tried to be detached from any personal feelings and be objective.
It was awkward because you had to rank your peers, but actually I think the exercise made sense to the people coming out of the room.
I think, as with a lot of things at Valve, it's very easy for the people who work really well inside these systems to brush aside concerns about them, because it's true that for a lot of people, if they have a certain type of personality, they're probably doing very well. It's not apparent to them the effect it has on people.
Right.
People who have a different psychological profile or a different level of perceived security within the company.
In January, employees then receive an automated email from Valve President Gabe Newell that says, hey, this is your new salary and here's how much you're getting paid as a bonus. I'm told, more recently at least, that those bonuses have calmed down in favor of higher salaries, but in the past, it wasn't unheard of for that bonus to be the equivalent of your entire salary in one go if you performed really highly and if the company has had a particularly profitable year. Alternatively, if you've ranked poorly, then you may find that you're now getting paid less as a result. Although almost everyone I spoke to said that trying to figure out the exact relationship between your performance that year and these numbers that you've ended up with is surprisingly tricky.
You never knew what that meant. All you knew was, I got a bonus that was really great last year, but then this year it's half as good. Does that mean I did way worse? Does it mean the company hasn't done as well this year and so bonuses are lower?
From the conversations I've had, this layer of mystery surrounding pay seems to come from 2 separate directions. On one hand, you've got Valve as a company deciding that stat ranking just works best when they don't then explain their working out at the end of the process. One former employee believed that by doing this, it stopped people from trying to game the system too much.
I think the best possible way to do this would be not only improve base pay, have one separate bonus. I'm looking at it from the outside, right? So it's different. But there would be 2 different types of bonuses. One bonus based on literally just overall company profits that increases, that's like directly tied to the company expanding, directly tied to the company making more money, regardless of what team you're a part of. And then a secondary bonus that is tied to the amount of profit that you're generating for the company individually. And this way, there's more of a sense of ownership over all of the products in the company. And then also simultaneously allows certain parts of the company to focus on long-term projects that don't require don't yield immediate returns on investment, and investment in the way of profits, like short-term profits in this circumstance. But if you're coupling workers' bonus with the value that they generate, how can you exploit them? Great example I can give you is people that work on the back end or people that work to keep the company going that don't immediately yield benefits in a way that managers and the people that are trying to identify mathematically how much value that they're generating are oftentimes going to be left behind. Like IT, janitors, you know what I mean? Or even people that are working on older games and you know, keeping those older games, keeping those older, no longer as profitable, seemingly profitable pieces of IP running. People that run the fucking servers, things like that. People that do bug fixes for old games. These are going to be profoundly important parts of a company that don't immediately yield profits, which is precisely the reason why you have to somehow keep them around, even though they're not generating sales for new projects and new products. The kind of people Elon would fire. Exactly. Like, look at Twitter. The reason why it's a massive fucking failure is because Elon Musk went in and fired most of the workforce. And that's why you keep running into issues when he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a fucking audio-only campaign announcement for Ron DeSantis. 600,000 people click into that, and it fails instantaneously. Why? Because you fired everybody, dumbass. You don't know who's doing the cleanup. There are so many parts of a company that's literally working and not necessarily working to immediately generate value for you.
And on the other hand, there's confusion because Valve employees just don't really talk to each other about their salaries and compare notes.
American culture doesn't like talking about how much we're getting paid. You might talk with some of your closer friends about, like, did you get what you expected? But you never really talk about the specific numbers.
A few of the women did after some of us quit. And then it was more of the case of, holy they should definitely have paid you more.
We'll have more to say on gender and diversity issues at the company later on in this video. Interestingly, any Valve employee can log on to Steam's dashboard and see exactly how much revenue the company has earned through that marketplace whenever they like. That can be for a specific game or region, or just generally.
It's like, dude, the guys running the CSGO gambling schemes are just like coming in fucking Bugattis. They're just rolling up to work in Bugattis every goddamn day, dude. And it shows in the fucking marketplace, too. They're like, holy fuck, dude. You want to know why? You want to know why they're not making Half-Life 3? Because the desk for the CSGO gambling is so big. Everybody fucking wheeled over there. They got gold wheels. I'm just glad that somebody wheeled their ass over to the fucking Steam Deck side, okay? It's such... God, I love the Steam Deck so much. I'm sorry. I hate glazing a company, but it is truly a revolutionary piece of tech, for me at least. It gives me so much joy.
How much money did Steam make this year? And a couple of people I spoke to use that as a sort of litmus test for trying to decipher exactly what their pay packet meant and where in the ranking they might have landed. But all speculation aside, what everyone knows is this.
What are you playing on it? Currently I'm playing Yakuza Kiwami 2. I'm playing through each individual Yakuza release right now, and it's so fucking good.
The opinion of your co-workers has the potential to dramatically affect the way in which you're being compensated.
I've seen people who, by their nature, don't give a
I did fight the babies. It was so funny. What was it? The title of that side quest is so stupid. Hey, even though we live in a capital shithole, Chipotle and Steam providing us with burrito bowls and handheld consoles makes everything worth it. I mean, I didn't say that, but if you can't change the structure, you might as well at least take advantage of some of its amenities, is the way I see it.
and say, I'm just going to work on the things I enjoy, and I trust that in the end, if I'm doing good work, it'll be fine. There are also plenty of people who, when faced with the dynamics of this, think, oh God, I better make sure I'm working on things that are perceived to be valuable.
A lot of people, including myself, did put a lot of weight on this throughout the year, so decisions that you made were through the lens of, how am I going to be ranked against my peers at the end of the year? And this did have the effect of a lot of people making short-term decisions. You know, I don't want to spend 3 years with a shit ranking because I'm working on some long-term project that may or may not pay off.
One of the most interesting ways you could see it seeping in was when people specifically did riskier projects near the beginning of the year, and then they'd go back to the more well-known ones as it gets closer to review time. because recency bias would make people focus on that stuff.
I've heard a number
this
of
is
pros
what I
and
mean.
cons when it comes to Valve stat ranking. On one hand, there's an argument that it helps incentivize some of the less enticing work to actually get done. Remember, this is a company that says you get to pick what you'd like to do. Well, if that's the case, you know, surely there's going to be some more boring or...
What if the amount of money that the game you worked on generated dictated how much money your next game got? So you have to play more, you have some play money and people who make shitty games don't? Well, the problem is when we're talking about something that is subjective, because video games are still art, an artistic medium, ultimately. I know that's going to be laughable for a lot of people, but it's the same as fucking movies. You run into the problem of, well, maybe some games are not going to generate as much fucking revenue, but it doesn't really matter. Because ultimately they're making games that are really good. They're barely art too. Yeah, the reason why you think movies and video games are fucking not art is because of the profit-seeking structure that we're talking about. It absolutely is art. You don't perceive it as such because everything is just fucking shitty DLCs and skins. All of these things are, you know, profit-driving incentives that have made all of these things. They've turned it into just, you know, money machines rather than something that is supposed to make you feel something.
You know, less jazzy work that might get left to one side if it weren't for the fact that by stepping up and doing it, you may then get a bump when it comes to your stat ranking score later down the line. People might say, hey, that person was a team player.
The irony is all of these people now, like most gamers now recognize that independent games are where it's at. Right? Indie games are where it's at. I wonder why. I wonder why indie games are often so, like, I mean, they're so cherished and celebrated, especially before they get sucked into the massive corporate scheme. I don't know why. I wonder how that keeps happening. Clearly, my man hasn't played Yakuza 0. It's art. No, I love Yakuza games. Yakuza games have revitalized my, reinvigorated my love for, like, single-player games. I forgot that people used to make and still make single-player games that are just, like, replayable, are vast, expansive. It's incredible. It's so fucking good. It is absolutely so good. Because all of the side quests are playable. All of the side quests are awesome. Because they're not woke. First of all, the Yakuza games are incredibly woke, ironically. Bro, there's literally trans people. There's a trans person in Yakuza 2. Like, one of the side quests is Earth Angel, which is a bar in the in Kamurocho, but technically it's actually Golden Guy, Champion District, and it's run by a mama who is trans. And one of the missions, one of the side missions, the first side mission is literally to beat the shit out of a transphobic person who is actually a chaser who turns out is just simply negging the trans lady. Like, and this game was made years ago. Trans mamas is a common Japanese trope. Yeah, okamis. But I know, but I'm just saying that, like, it's funny to think that it's, like, not a fucking woke game or whatever.
Player this year. And alongside that, quite a few of the people I interviewed believed that it's no bad thing for Valve employees to be prioritizing work that is perceived as valuable to the company, because if you're grinding away on project after project that ultimately ends in disaster, then perhaps you shouldn't also be entitled to such a large slice of the pie. But here's an important question. What exactly does valuable mean to Valve? Does it mean financial success? That's certainly part of it. If you've helped ship Half-Life Alyx, perhaps that's something that can be partially quantified in terms of sales and revenue targets. That's not going to be the whole picture, but it's certainly a factor. However, when it comes to some of this other stuff listed in the handbook section on stat ranking, like how much has your coworker contributed to studio process, hiring, integrating people into the team, etc., well, suddenly That's a different kind of judgment call. What's valuable in this case depends much more on personal taste, or to put it another way, personal biases. I can't tell you how many women work at Valve, or people of color, or non-binary folks, or those who identify as LGBTQ, or disabled people, because, well, Valve is a private company.
It's comfortable.
Actually, given we've just discussed hiring, let's turn our attention to the other end of the spectrum as well. If I do think all of this contributes to Valve's issues with diversity, there are certain barriers here which are just harder to overcome if you don't fit this mold that Valve has always had. Now, it's hard to overstate the financial success that Valve has enjoyed over the years. Again, this is a private company, so we don't have the figures to hand, but multiple employees describe Steam's enormous revenues as having completely changed the trajectory of Valve Corporation. I'm told that Valve would almost certainly
This is
have
the
shipped
most
more
interesting
games,
part.
not necessarily better ones, but definitely more, had it adopted a traditional company structure that doesn't allow employees to walk or roll away from projects as easily. But ultimately, Steam's success has meant Valve's income has not been dependent on the next game it ships in a very long time. As a result, more than one employee described landing a job at Valve as like getting tenure at a university. Valve's business model and rich war chest of funds makes it a very different kind of employer that has the potential to allow its employees to do very different things that they may find harder to justify at, say, a publicly listed company or somewhere that's hemorrhaging money between new products being shipped. And so when it comes to taking big, ambitious swings at projects with harder to quantify returns on investment, Valve has been able to step boldly into the world of virtual reality and hardware manufacturing, but employees say that that same belief, that same trust, isn't also being applied to making Valve a more diverse employer.
If it's an issue that the people in power also understand fully, then they make all sorts of accommodations. So stuff like parental leave. I think the people in power can understand that having a kid is hard, and so we should give people 6 months time off. But should we make it easier for people of color to join the company? They'll just be like, why? I feel like that's the dividing line. They are really, really good for employees for things they really understand.
Some of this frustration spilled out into a wider discussion within the company after the murder of George Floyd in early 2020, as a group of employees within Valve pushed for the company to make a public statement in support.
Okay, this stuff is not about what kind of projects that they're working on, so I'm not going to watch the rest of it. I honestly feel like the old-style corporate bureaucracy, Bell Labs, Xerox, actually fostered innovation and creativity more than Valve's decentralized popularity. Like, Bell Labs literally just hired smart people and let them fuck around because the managers have no idea what the fuck they're doing. All right, so why did we talk about Valve? Because it's a different kind of corporate structure. Why were we talking about any of this? Well, because Microsoft just won the FTC lawsuit, that the antitrust lawsuit, or rather was allowed to purchase Activision Blizzard. I bet Baby Gronk watches Skibidi Toilets. Yes. Luke Stevens has been caught plagiarizing H Bomber Guy and other creators. Please don't watch him. Yeah, I don't care. I don't know who this person is, but he's covering this story, so I do want to know.
Days in the history of gaming, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, technically the biggest day is going to be in like 7 days when the deal closes, but today is the day when it's basically settled, which is that the FTC has failed to argue their points in front of a judge, meaning that they're pretty much cleared and good to go as far as the US is concerned. The deadline for the deal is July 18th. There are still a couple of like lawsuits and stuff that in theory could clog this up in the States, but it's extremely unlikely that anything of note really happens after this. And as I've told you guys before, often the best way to know whether or not a deal or a merger or acquisition is going through is simply to look at the stocks involved, because stock traders and investors on Wall Street that have billions of dollars on the line are doing their homework. They're paying people to listen into court hearings and all this so that they can have an edge on other traders and know whether or not this is going through or not. And as we've seen just today, the deal is actually causing the stock to spike up a lot. You can see this morning it was trading at $82 a share. Now, after this decision came down, it shot up all the way into the low 90s, which, if you recall, the original offer from Microsoft was $95 a share. So effectively, in really simplistic terms, the closer to $95 this is, the more likely and more certain it is that the deal is going through. Because in a perfect world with zero risk, this would be 95. They offered 95. It's going to close at 95. The stock is worth 95 a share. Easy peasy. But the only reason it's not is because of risk and the potential for this not to go through, or for the price to be adjusted or whatever else. And as you can see, we're already quickly approaching 95. And as the next few days go by, I wouldn't be shocked if this got up to 92, 93, 94 as the deal gets closer and closer to being finalized. But what exactly happened? Because everybody's been talking about this deal, but it seems like very few people actually know what was going on or what the major concerns were. Well, there's two things going on I've heard a lot of people mix up. On the one hand, there's the CMA. The CMA is the group in the UK. They handle a lot of regulatory stuff over there, and they evaluated this deal and initially declined to endorse it and even rejected it, saying that they had massive concerns related to Microsoft's cloud gaming platform, and that acquiring Activision Blizzard would give them an unfair advantage because they have this cloud gaming infrastructure that other companies like Sony and PlayStation don't have. On the other side, we have the US, and in the United States, we have the FTC that's evaluating this deal, and they originally sued to block this deal from going through. However, after 5 days of testimony and an extended consideration time from Judge Corley, we got the decision that dropped down. And basically, this decision backhands everybody that was trying to make really lazy arguments as to why this deal shouldn't go through. Just to be clear, I don't like that Microsoft is able to just come in and pay cash for massive companies that fundamentally change the gaming landscape forever. I don't love that. But it's a reality of our situation that for one can happen.
Ringur.
And as far as I can tell, with my degree in corporate finance, speaking to a lot of my professors about this, it seems pretty clear and cut and dry that this deal made sense. There is no antitrust concern that really holds up in a court of law. As the saying goes, there's what we know, there's what we feel and believe, and then there's what you can prove in court. And in court, they just weren't able to demonstrate any of these concerns that they have regarding Microsoft and acquiring more gaming companies or anything like that. As stated in the decision by Judge Corley this morning, Microsoft's acquisition of Activision has been described as the largest in tech history. It deserves scrutiny. Absolutely agree. It deserves scrutiny. That scrutiny has paid off. Microsoft has committed in writing, in public, and in court to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation for 10 years on parity with Xbox. They go on to say it made an agreement with Nintendo to bring Call of Duty to Switch, and it entered several agreements to, for the first time, bring Activision's content to several cloud gaming services, not just their own, such as
Guys, they'll definitely follow through.
Nvidia's.
Also, brother, how desperate are you for some FPS gaming to play Call of Duty on Switch? It's gonna run like shit. Pre-Steam Deck, Hasan was a big Nintendo loyalist who certainly tried to play Witcher 3 on Switch. And let me tell you, okay, that was a fucking experience. And not a good one. Oh my lord, dude.
And some that are specific over in Europe. They say the court's responsibility, while narrow, is to decide if, notwithstanding these current circumstances, the merger should be halted, perhaps even terminated, pending resolution of the FTC administrative action. They go on to say the court finds the FTC has not shown a likelihood that it will prevail on its claim that this particular vertical merger in this specific industry may substantially lessen competition. To the contrary, the record evidence points to more consumer access to Call of Duty and other Activision content. The motion for a preliminary injunction is therefore denied. And again, this is a big deal because while the FTC can, in theory, appeal this decision, it's unlikely that that would be taken up by further higher courts.
Oh yeah, I've never played a game on Switch that wasn't a Nintendo exclusive that ran well. I'm sorry. Don't get mad at me. But like Disco Elysium was literally a pain. It was so fucking hard to actually play that fucking game. on the Switch, and it's not even like a hardware intensive. I guess Hades is one that I did play on Switch that ran great, but Disco Elysium was so bad. It's literally a fucking book. I don't know how you can make a book game run awful on the Switch, which they did. They managed to do it. Hades was good. I guess Hades was the only non Nintendo exclusive that I played that was good.
And even then, there's questions of timing because this deal is set to close within basically a week from today. And listen, even if you are a PlayStation gamer and you are looking at this like, oh my God, this would suck for Microsoft, for Xbox to own Diablo, Overwatch, like all of these games, it would just blow. I understand that sentiment. And like I said, I don't like that this deal is going through. If I were the God Emperor of mankind, I would not allow deals like this to go through. However, that's unfortunately for everybody, not the world that we live in. And as far as I can tell, looking at this as skeptically and level-headedly as I can, there just isn't a lot of there in this argument against this acquisition going through. All of the arguments were very, very bizarre because when PlayStation was making initial arguments against this deal, it was describing how Microsoft would start to do all sorts of things to make games exclusive to consoles, to take games away from players on other consoles, which is perhaps a valid argument, but PlayStation is probably the worst company on earth to make the argument that that's not okay, because they've been doing it for 2 decades unimpeded, and everybody loves their exclusives, so nobody seems to really mind. It's just that now Microsoft is going to start playing the same game. Now PlayStation is getting really upset. I understand why. It's a big deal for their business. It sucks, but it's just a bad argument. It just is. And other arguments against this deal going through didn't hold much water either, such as saying just broadly that this would lessen competition. To the contrary, as far as the court is concerned, previous to this deal going through, if you wanted to play Call of Duty, you needed to buy a $550 console from either Microsoft with an Xbox or from PlayStation with a PlayStation 5, or buy a PC for even more than that. There was a big barrier to entry. However, owned by Microsoft, Call of Duty is going to be brought to xCloud, to NVIDIA's GeForce Now, to all of these other cloud gaming platforms, which don't have that upfront cost. Whether that sounds good to you, personally to me, cloud streaming a competitive shooter sounds horrible, but whether or not that's practical for our particular play styles or preferences, that does increase the amount of players that can access these games. It just does. You don't have to like it. It doesn't have to be you that it now appeals to, but there is a population out there that previously couldn't play these games that will now be able to with cloud services, thanks to Microsoft's cloud infrastructure. It's just a fact of the matter as far as the court is concerned. So all of these arguments against the deal just don't really hold up. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if none of these arguments hold up, why are we fighting it? Like, what's the problem? Why is this not just going through? And that's pretty much where the judge landed. And that's why pretty much every legal analyst that I've looked up and been following on this case has said, we don't really understand why there's all of this hullabaloo about it. It's a big acquisition, sure, but on paper, it's a slam dunk. It doesn't make any sense for this not to go through. Now, as for where things go from here, it seems that the deal is going to close probably by the 18th of this month, so within just a week or so. And after that, we probably are going to see a very slow adjustment. You'll see some games like Diablo 4, I'm sure, will come to Game Pass day one. You're going to start to see stuff like that happen, exclusive bundles available for Game Pass subscribers and Call of Duty and things like that. But it's going to be probably a year or two before you start to really notice big changes. And as for whether this helps the games, and
I'm sorry, but if you're an Xbox fan, I assume you're xenophobic. Dude, you're such a fucking Sony or Nintendo fanboy. It's not even funny. Because that's literally how I used to think. When I was in Turkey, I was like, why the fuck do people like Xbox? They must hate, like, They must hate Sony because they're Japanese. They hate Japanese people. I'm not even kidding. That's literally how I used to feel as well. My girlfriend hated Skibidi Toilet. Should I break up with her immediately? Yeah, I'm afraid you have to do that immediately.
Studios in question, only time will tell. I've said many times, I'm not impressed with how Microsoft manages their studios. I don't think they've figured that out yet, and I think they have a lot of work to do before they can consistently release quality titles. So I would not hold my breath for all of a sudden these games to just become really good or really polished. I would not expect that to happen whatsoever.
Raging Hopper, thank you for the 10 gifted.
Because fundamentally, these are the same companies. They're just now going to be owned by another group. Instead of being owned by shareholders, they're owned by a bigger company that has shareholders. So it's just two sides of the same coin. But anyway, I wanted to get this video out there before it got too late.
Bullshit.
Offer my thoughts on all this. Short and sweet, TLDR. I'm not thrilled that this deal is going through, but I'm not obtuse enough to think that this should have been blocked by the court, because as far as I can tell, there was no legal basis to block it, at least according to US law and US antitrust concerns and regulations. It just wasn't there. So it seems as though the deal's going through. Even if the CMA refuses to adjust their ruling, which as of right now, a couple of minutes before I started filming, they announced that the CMA and Microsoft are meeting on final resolutions to some of their concerns, or what they call remedies, which basically is just, let's come to an agreement to get this thing across the finish line. So
the only reason Sony is pissed about this is COD. Make a good game, Sony, and you won't have to worry about it. Wait, what do you mean? No, it's not just COD. They keep buying more. What? Microsoft buying out a publisher and a developer is not just COD. Any kind of publisher and developer that makes a bunch of other games limits limits games to Xbox and Microsoft. All I'm saying, this is a very Kindle deal. I hope it goes over the line. This is a very Kindle deal. That's such a funny way to frame any kind of merger or acquisition. This is giving Kendall Roy. Any kind of corporate consolidation is going to lead to bad results for gamers. Maybe not in the short term, but usually even in the short term, and certainly in the long term. That's it. That's it. That's the fucking take. That's the only take you could take to the goddamn bank with you.